In May 2016, Islamic State released a video, "Shield Yourselves and Your Families from a Fire," named after a Quranic verse, which opened on the back of a boy kneeling in front of a vintage television set. A male voice chants, "O you who have believed, protect yourselves and your families from a fire, whose fuel is people and stone." Then a thin orange flame encircles the boy in a ring of fire. A narrator warns that after the Crusaders failed to subdue ISIS by force, they were now hatching a mental conquest. Then the narrator threatens the Crusaders who introduced these dishes to the home of Islam. Now they are only scrap metal, and soon they will be shrapnel tearing your bodies apart in your home. Why does the video, thematically protective, end up with a call for graphic violence? The video bespeaks a dogma that sees media as weapons, defensive and offensive. In the past, I have argued that some ISIS visuals are best understood as projectilic images. Today, I build on that research and introduce what I call prophylactic images. To tackle these issues, I analyzed 3 videos and 3 texts that mobilize the power of fire as a military weapon, as symbolic ammunition, as a theological trope, as tool of punishment, and as rhetorical device. I define fire as both a meta-medium and an infra-medium. Then I argue that fire is a metaphor for the war machine, for ISIS itself, which deploys it to define a world composed of 2 realms: the homeland, to be protected by a ring of fire, this is the hearth, and an outside world to be subdued by the blaze of war, that is the torch. ISIS identity lives in a binary between hearth and torch, and fire is central to the projectilic and prophylactic images that correspond to these 2 realms. Fire is everywhere in ISIS expression. It helps forge a dualistic identity, a celebrated self occupying the hearth that must be defended, pitted against a reviled other that must be incinerated by the torch. ISIS borrows selectively from Islam's holy and eschatological texts, from Hollywood special effects, from Al Jazeera graphics, and from the faux primitivism of reality TV. Enlisting the flame's considerable expressive capacity and symbolic power, ISIS fuses time and space, old and new, sacred and profane. Fire is both meta-medium and infra-medium. What do I mean by this? Fire figures prominently in the Quran, Islam's holy book, in the Hadith, the sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, and in the myths and stories concerned with the end of the world and published in the first 200 years of Islam. That's eschatological literature. Fire as hell and the garden as paradise are central to Islam's story of origin. But we should be wary of exceptionalizing Islam or orientalizing ISIS. After all, fire is a fixture of Christian and Jewish holy texts as well. In the Old Testament, fire is Yahweh's medium. Christian hell, like the Muslim one, is an eternal fire. Fire is a universal symbol because it has played a vital role in human civilization. Fire molds matters and ideas. It is, quote, the great transmuter, the American historian Stephen Pine called it, of wood, of metal, of sociality. A stimulus to the imagination, the flame is, quote, one of the greater operators of images, wrote the French chemist and philosopher Gaston Bachelard. Contemporary writers have likened the magic of cinema to the capacity of fire to beguile. Others have equated the rise of the internet to the rediscovery of fire. Fire, then, as the anthropologist Levi-Strauss has shown, is a civilizational instrument. It's culture's tool to shape nature. It hardens spear tips. It warms up a cold cave. It cooks raw meat. But fire is also an infra-medium. Fire is a primal medium. As Chris Anderson argued in a famous essay in 2011, in which he observed that web videos were, quote, spreading across the web like wildfire because they were tapping into something primal and powerful. Fire, then, is an operative image. Operative images, as the artist Harun Farouki defined them, are, quote, images that do not represent an object, but rather are part of an operation. Such images create a sense that physical bodies coexist. That is how they convey projectilic affect, a feeling of bodily harm and violation caused by an object or an image hurtling towards you at high speed. As an inframedium, fire has a peculiar capacity to stir our imagination and alter our perception. Bachelard wrote about a phenomenology of affectivity that sets the ground for understanding fire as affect, fire as feeling, an experience that orients us towards specific feelings and specific imaginaries. Now let me give you a bit about the 3 videos. First, Flames of War. Flames of War shows ISIS conquering one city after another in Iraq and Syria. It enacts a visual ethnogenesis when it stitches incidents of territorial conquest into an event etched in time, the birth of the caliphate. By portraying this expanding polity as a raging inferno devouring enemy settlements one after another, Flames of War articulate ethnogenesis, which means the birth of a collective identity, with pyropoiesis, which is meaning-making with fire. In Flames of War, this fiery ethos is manifest in multiple projectilic sequences drawn against a geopolitical backdrop of war and conquest. 2. Healing the believer's chest. This video of the burning of the Jordanian Air Force pilot is a peculiar hybrid of snuff cinema, of reality television, and pornography. Camera angles and depth of field vary to either quicken the pace of action or slow it down so that viewers miss not a single excruciating detail. It's a horrid, slow morbidity staged as a tantalizing spectacle. The ritualistic mise-en-scène captures the pilot's terrified face and supine body as flames engulf him, decelerating specific scenes in a terrifying aesthetic of stretched temporality, accentuated by shrinking intervals and a focus on details from multiple angles. In the atrocious finale, the pilot succumbs to the flame, then a bulldozer buries the cage with a dump of stones. The first 2 videos showcase projectilic images. The next one features prophylactic images. That's video 3. What are you waiting for? In this video, French fighters gather around a bonfire, take turns to exhort French Muslims to migrate to the caliphate. The men's hair cascades to their shoulders, bullets and belts bejeweled their chests, machine guns and serrated swords jutted above their shoulders. Kitted like hybrids of Hong Kong film ninjas and Hollywood action heroes, their glistening eyes were as frightened as they were frightening. If Flames of War represents fire as a torch that burns the caliphate's enemy, What Are You Waiting For represents the hearth that attracts recruits. To create a new community is to forego old allegiances. At the end of What Are You Waiting For, one by one, recruits toss their French passports into the bonfire. In that double act, they renounce colonial citizenship and denounce France. The flame blasts a threshold between what once was and what is now to be. A fundamental insight follows. In ISIS propaganda, a projectilic affect always lurks under a prophylactic veneer. Harm is inextricably linked to wellness. To defend oneself is to harm the non-self. ISIS identity exists only through its opposites. Death is at the center of life, but a flame of community shimmers over dying and demise. One way to understand the articulation of ethnogenesis and pyropoiesis, of projectilic and prophylactic images, is to focus on how this kind of agitprop manipulates our feelings. Fire plays an incredibly powerful role in this grand recoding of affect, because it makes possible slippages between projectilic affects and prophylactic affects. For example, we can better understand why the atrocious burning of a human being is framed as a soothing spectacle in Healing the Believer's Chest. Why scenes of belonging end up with the symbolic violence of passport burning in What Are You Waiting For? And why the flame turns from shield of childhood to shrapnel tearing the enemy apart in Shield Yourselves and Your Families from a Fire. Insurgencies by pyromaniac non-state actors signal a shift from geopolitics to what the philosopher Michael Marder calls pyropolitics, from the politics of the earth to the politics of fire. Though ancient philosophers, like Heraclitus, considered fire a unified field of rival forces, Enlightenment thinkers splintered fire. They celebrated light as reason and banished heat as passion. Today's extremists have initiated their own replacement of the light without heat ideal of rationality and a world order of nation-state with a heat without light ethos of charred psyche and scorched earth that blasts bodies and boundaries.